Welcome to part 3 of thinking about steel frame projects. So, I think the most basic thing that you can think about is what is your main frame going to be made out of, and what's the main frame going to be made out of? What is your building going to be doing? So what's the role of your building? And 3, how does the kind of the form expression happen by choosing the correct steel frame plus the cladding. Now, there's a number of ways of thinking about this. I think you've got to think about what your building is going to look like. If you're going to have a pure cube and you cut through that, you're going to end up having to have some sort of eye section of something where, say that it was horizontal cladding, that horizontal cladding will end up coming past. You're going to have to resolve that detail so that you're going to end up having an angle around that corner, because you're going to end up doing something like that. You have to at this point determine whether that's going to be aesthetically pleasing or not. And this is for a standard frame. This is for a standard kind of frame project on the ground. You can, if I just do a section, this is if your building is standing on the ground. If your building is standing on the ground, you're already going to have to find a way to lift that off the ground somehow and find a way that people actually get into it. Because you're not going to be doing, you can do a standard foundation. Well, what does that look like? So it means that if I've got an I-beam, that I-beam sits on top of a stub column. Let's draw this in AXO. And it meets another stub column a couple of meters down the road. And then this I-beam spans that distance. You've got to ask yourself whether this looks good, whether you want that kind of stub column look. I much prefer something that just, you can't see it at all. How do you do that? If I cut section, I will try to not see the supports on the end, which means that either I take a structure right through or I take the structure off like that so that the support comes down onto it like that. So immediately I'm trying to make some conceptual ideas or thoughts about it. This can also be replaced by a C-section. These are easier. Think about that face. So if you come along with this, it's easier to kind of fix into as opposed to this. Those are some of the basic pros and cons already. I think that there are other ways of thinking about project conceptually. If you took a square tube, now this is starting to become there's a steel tube. This is very expensive. If you start basically like bird's nest project, if you do a project that is about a deconstruction of some sorts, and this is exposed, which means that, let's draw in a different color, which means that whatever is behind, if this is outside, and if I had to draw it conceptually, that this is your project and that someone standing outside of it the structure is expressed and you can cut things out of it, means that this now becomes not only the enclosure, but it also becomes the aesthetic and the structure itself. So that's one way of doing it. So you can either hide, you can either expose. That's A, B. Another version of it is when you do what they call high-tech architecture. You can pull things and anchor them down into the ground, and you can hang a box like that. You could have a staircase going up to it like that. That's a very high-tech way of doing things. Another architect, what he did was he created an exoskeleton. This is a girder. This is the height of like the person. And well, this is almost kind of like Pompidou. And what's happening is you essentially creating a clear span on the inside, because all the structure can be held by the outside. So if you look from the inside, what that looks like, this could be sheeted metal. Have you ever looked underneath a garage, petrol garage? They create an exoskeleton, an upside down skeleton. So this, what you see, is just the sheeting. The garage roof does this. The column comes through. They put two girders across like this. And then they run a girder across the outside. And then I think intermediates. And when you look under the underside, it's clear. They put the sheeting underneath. So they basically flip it upside down. Yeah, so I think once you start looking at, if you start looking at tubes, for example, tubular sections, you can bend tubular sections, but the problem is that if this was a real project, it's not very easy to bend them, but you can do them. And the problem with tubes is that in plan or in section, you can never really fix things easily to whatever. If this is a gypsum board on the inside, how do you fix that? Or if you're doing galvanized sheeting on the outside, how do you fix that? I mean, say for example, that was sitting there, do you just fix it like that? So what you would do is you would have to introduce new fixing. If this is you would weld lug on. Perhaps it's maybe at an angle like that. And then as things come past it, you would screw straight into it with a washer behind. So if we do bend tubes, I think they could be quite expressive. If this was a sheeted metal, and then you could contrast it with glazing, with a concrete base. It could be quite cool. All right. I think for me, the most important is the what's the wall made of and what's the connections. We can't, it's very difficult to do that. It's not difficult, but it's just not nice. You're going to end up putting a inside skin on the inside like that. That could work. That's the most basic. If you start looking at an I-beam, the question is, how do you fix onto this thing? Okay, so these are all the questions that you have to ask yourself when designing a steel frame project.